Welcome to Channel's Business Global with me, Juliana Olayinka, from our studios here in London. Coming up on today's show, Rishi Sunak has pledged to put Britain's defence spending on a war footing by increasing it to 2.5% of national income by 2030. Our Downing Street correspondent Simon Pusey will soon be joining me from here in the studio with an overview of the British Prime Minister's 48-hour visit to Europe this week and India's 2024 general election, which is being held over 6 weeks, will be the biggest the world has ever seen, with 969 million eligible voters. More than half the world's population, living in more than 50 countries, will be hosting elections this year, marking a pivotal period for global democracies. Kevin Casas-Zamora, the Secretary General of the International Institute for Democracy and Electoral Assistance, will be joining me from Stockholm to talk through the strategies being implemented to ensure ballots are free, fair and safe. Then later, several weeks after Nigeria paused a controversial annual levy that would have required businesses employing expatriates to pay a minimum $10,000 levy, I caught up with Zach Adedeji, the Executive Chairman of the Federal Inland Revenue Services, for an overview of the current tax revenue landscape in Nigeria. But first, 3 men have been arrested in connection with the deaths of 5 migrants who were trying to reach Britain in a small boat on Tuesday. According to the National Crime Agency, the victims, 3 men, a woman and a 7-year-old girl, died after an unprecedented 112 migrants were crammed into a dinghy. The engine stopped working shortly after the boat hit a sandbank, having left a beach in northern France. Of the 107 survivors, 49 were taken ashore and 58 refused to return to France, instead continuing on towards British waters. Elsewhere, the Conservative government's controversial Rwanda bill has finally become law after it received royal assent on Thursday. The scheme, which seeks to deport asylum seekers arriving into the UK via small boats to Rwanda, was passed by Parliament this week, following a series of setbacks and delays. Rishi Sunak has promised the first flights will take off in 10 to 12 weeks, come what may. In other news, the Chancellor has defended plans to slash civil service jobs to increase defence spending and Ukraine aid. Jeremy Hunt said cutting public services will cost a great deal less compared to allowing Russia to succeed. The Prime Minister has pledged to increase UK military spending to 2.5% of national income by 2030. The government has confirmed the increase will cost an extra £20 billion, which unions claim will be funded by cutting 70,000 jobs. Well, for more on this, I was earlier joined in the studio by our Downing Street correspondent, Simon Pusey. Simon, so Prime Minister Rishi Sunak back on the global scene this week. A huge announcement, the biggest boost to defence spending in a generation for this country. Talk to me about it.
Yeah, and I think it's there's a number of different angles here. He's obviously, everything Rishi Sunak does is trying in some way to get a little bit better in the polls ahead of an election. And this kind of probably ticks that box in lots of different ways. Yeah. I think it really appeals to the base, to the Conservative base, which is very kind of, you know, Britain flying the flag for the rest of the world and
defending the nation,
world
yes,
and being on the same side as the United States. I think it'll definitely please the United States. You remember Donald Trump saying that NATO countries weren't spending enough on GDP on their defence, and 2.5% is above what we committed to. But let's put this in context that 2.5% is what Labour say they will do as well. It's what Boris Johnson said the Conservative Party would do as well. So it's not necessarily anything new.
Yes.
But
it's over time, isn't it? It's within 6 years.
It's over time, so it's gradually ramping that up, yeah. He was talking about countering threats from an axis of authoritarian states, so therefore he's obviously talking about Russia, China, countries like that. He's stressing that the UK is not on the brink of war, but actually lots of people will point to the fact that we kind of are already at war. Lots of people don't realise this, but, you know, via the proxy that is Ukraine, we are kind of fighting Russia. We might not be literally sending our troops there, but we're sending a lot of money and weapons there, as is the United States and Europe, of course. So he was in Poland, as you say, and Rishi Sunak isn't often really on the global stage in the same way that Boris Johnson would be flying everywhere, and probably Liz Truss, if she was there a little bit longer, would be flying around the world. It seems like a sort of easy win, and it shows you off to be this grand statesman, but that's not really what Rishi Sunak's about. He prefers sort of domestic issues. So it's a rare occasion, but Yeah, 87 billion pounds by 2030 per year is what we'll be spending, and that's a huge sum, of course. But again, put it
There
in
will be
perspective.
cuts. There'll be cuts to the civil service, right?
Exactly. Firstly, the critics are saying, well, where's this money coming from? Because they haven't said where those cuts are going to fall.
Right.
You can't just throw 87 billion pounds of unfunded things, but that's what they've done. It also sounds impressive, doesn't it, 87 billion, but we're currently at 2.3% of GDP, so 2.5% of GDP over the next 5-6 years is not that huge, right? It's kind of, and it's also part of a series of announcements by Rishi Sunak at the moment, I think, to try and show his party that he's still got enough energy in the tank. Yes, we're behind in the polls. Yes, but a week's a long time in politics. Who knows what's going to happen over the next couple of months before the general election? I've still got ideas. So obviously that cigarette bill was passed. Rwanda policy exactly has gone through. So he's trying to show that he's got new ideas and he's playing to the base and stick with me kind of thing.
It's been a good week.
It has been, yeah, exactly. There are still always scandals.
Always.
We're still hearing things, and that will continue, and there will still be MPs stepping down ahead of the next election. But I think these are the kind of things he thinks he needs to do to win voters back, especially those hardcore conservative voters where defence and army spend is significant and important. And obviously it comes at the same time as the US has just signed into their law that they're going to send a lot of military aid to Ukraine. So it sounds like, it looks like the optics are that we're the same side as America. We're, sticking together. But yeah, there are questions about where this money is going to come from. And also, if you put it into context, it's maybe not as big an announcement as he wants to make out.
Absolutely. Thank you, Simon.
Thank you.
India's elections, which began last week and run until early June, offer a preview of how an explosion of AI tools is transforming the democratic process, making it easy to develop seamless fake media around campaigns. More than half the world's population, living in more than 50 countries, will be hosting elections in 2024, marking a pivotal period for global democracies. While it's unknown how many AI fakes have been made by politicians, experts say they are observing a global uptick of electoral deepfakes. Well, for more on this, I'm now being joined by Kevin Casas-Zamora, the Secretary-General of the International Institute for Democracy and Electoral Assistance. Kevin joins me from Stockholm. Kevin Casas-Zamora, Secretary-General of the International Institute for Democracy and Electoral Assistance. It's an absolute pleasure having you on the show today. So many elections have already taken place this year. We've got big ones coming up. There's an election taking place here in the UK. Of course, there's the big one across the pond in America. Looking ahead towards the end of 2024, what do International IDEA see as the biggest challenges in maintaining the safety and integrity of elections globally? And what steps can be taken to address them more importantly?
Well, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure being here. In terms of threats to integrity, there are plenty. Let me say a few. First of all, there are many threats to the autonomy of electoral authorities around the world. Many robust, credible electoral authorities are coming under political fire, coming from incumbents wanting to control the electoral process. Disinformation campaigns, often of a transnational nature, is becoming, of course, a big issue. Then you have a widespread perception, which we just documented through a survey that we released a few days ago, about the lack of credibility of electoral processes around the world. This is remarkable. I mean, we surveyed 19 countries around the world, very diverse sample, including big countries, small countries in all regions, and only 2 of the 19 showed a majority of the population that believes that the electoral process is credible and trustworthy. So this is a huge concern, of course. And then last but not least, climate-related events that are disrupting elections all over the place, often in very significant ways. So I would say those 4 starters.
Thank you for giving us a broad assessment there, Kevin, particularly talking about climate change, because, of course, this predominantly affects lower income countries when it comes to them not having access to the ballot. So thank you for remembering them. I want to talk about a lot of the mistrust because, goodness me, who would have thought that you've got a former president of the world's largest economy attending court? Is this going to affect him running as president again? We doubt it. But, you know, former President Donald Trump still believes that the previous election was stolen from him. I would like your take on that because, of course, for your institution to work, you've got to collaborate with institutional bodies, with government. How is your relationship with them? Because sometimes this misinformation is being spewed by them.
Of course. I mean, I don't have anything particularly insightful to say about the judicial travails of former President Trump. Those cases will run their course. What I can tell you is that what happened in the U.S. before, during, and after, in particular, the 2020 election has had global repercussions in terms of eroding the credibility of electoral processes and trust in them. And I'll give you a couple of examples. I mean, if you take some of the statements made by the military in Myanmar right before the coup that happened 3 years ago, when the elections that had taken place, the democratic elections, were canceled by the military, were annulled by the military, some of those statements repeat almost verbatim many of the things that Donald Trump had said at the time of the 2020 election. I can give you examples from Latin America, closely fought elections where the losers repeated verbatim many of the same accusations against the electoral authority in terms of bias, in terms of the whole process being rigged. So this has had the big lie has gone global, and this is something that we have to be aware of. And we are working very closely with election management bodies around the world to counter that, to give them tools to counter disinformation of this sort. This is, and I can tell you this with direct knowledge, this is an issue that is top of mind for every electoral authority around the world. And it's a vexing issue, but we're on the case. I mean, ultimately, elections reflect the quality of the democratic setup that surrounds those elections. One of the things that we have noticed, and this is very concerning, is that in terms of the representation of women, the trends are not good. Imagine, for example, I'll give you a factoid. Before the start of this global election year, 25% roughly of countries that were supposed to have elections had either a female heads of government or heads of state. And so far, we've had 24 national elections, and in those 24 cases, 0 women have been elected.
Shocking.
Head of government or head of state. So that tells you that the trends when it comes to the representation of women are not good. And we, even before that, we know that we have a long way to go.
Kevin Casas Zamora, who is the Secretary General of the International Institute for Democracy and Electoral Assistance. Thank you so much for your time today. Coming up on Channel's Business Global, several weeks after Nigeria paused a controversial annual levy that would have required businesses employing expatriates to pay a minimum $10,000 levy, I caught up with Zach Adedeji, the executive chairman of the Federal Inland Revenue Services, for an overview of the current tax revenue landscape in Nigeria, and Maurizio Caial, the founder and managing partner of TLCom Capital, will be joining me from Johannesburg to discuss details of its Tide Africa Fund 2, its second fund for technology in Africa, valued at $154 million. All of this after the break. Do stay with us. Welcome back to Channel's Business Global with me, Juliana Olayinka, from our studios here in London. As Nigeria continues its journey towards economic growth and development, one institution plays a pivotal role in ensuring sustainable revenue generation and fiscal stability. The Federal Inland Revenue Service, under the leadership of Zach Adedeji, stands at a critical juncture in establishing efficiency and innovation in the realm of tax administration. I want you to talk to me, if you can, about Nigeria's tax landscape and what plans you have over the next few years to evolve the state it's in at the moment.
Thank you for this invite. When you talk about Nigeria landscape, I like to premise it on Mr. President's vision for Nigeria. And number one vision is to banish poverty. And that is why we have the cliche under his administration that our plan is to tax prosperity, not poverty, to tax return, not investment, and to tax the fruit and not the seed. What that means is that our approach to tax administration in Nigeria is of sheer prosperity, because our vision as a tax administrator is to assess fairly, collect equitably, and keep responsibly. That is our plan. So if you look at general landscape and you see the antecedents or the plan Mr. President has done is to first of all reset economic fundamentals. Because if you are to tax the prosperity, there must be a good economic environment. That is why we remove subsidy, which is causing a lot of imbalance. Not only that, the central bank unified the rate to make sure that we have equitable access to all good market economy. So that is the first thing that we've done. Not only that, Mr. President set up a presidential committee on tax reform and fiscal policy, because one of the major problems we have is this multiplicity of taxes. And then we've done our assessment that what gives us roughly more than 85% of our taxes is not more than 9 taxes. So why do we have these 46 taxes? So Mr. President set that up. And then when you look at all those things, it's just to put fundamental in place to make sure that the tax administration, tax system actually serves the purpose it's supposed to serve, which is one, equitable distribution of the national or country wealth, and also to be able to mobilize domestic revenue for economic development. So when you look at Mr. President's plan as far as tax administration is concerned, it is looking and going into fundamental so that we can have sustainable way of domestic revenue mobilization. So that is the plan. So when you ask about the landscape, we have been there now almost 1 year. And if to go by anything that we've seen, I know we are in a good path. And Mr. President's idea of not increasing taxes, but reduce the number we have to single digits, actually that is the mandate he has given to us, and removing all the bottlenecks that can impede business growth. Because if we are to tax the poverty, the prosperity, not poverty, we need to banish the poverty. And if you look at the what even recently, the commencement of consumer credit, which is what return the power, purchasing power to people. And then the plan we have is today we are focusing on civil servants because of their fixed income and certainty of their income. The next 12 months, it will cover the whole country, and that is growing the manufacturing base, because then you know that people have purchasing capacity. If you look at the infrastructure that Mr. President planned on infrastructure, because for us to have sustainable development, our infrastructure and agric development, which is food security, must go pari passu, which is the plan we have. So for us, tax is just a consequence of our actions. And that is why you see me, even as a chairman of Federal Land Revenue, I work more, not on collection, but on making sure that economic fundamentals are right. Then I can collect more.
TLCom Capital, the Africa-focused venture capital firm, announced recently the final close of Tide Africa Fund 2, its second fund for technology in Africa, valued at $154 million. The new fund accelerates the firm's mission to partner with elite founders to tackle the continent's biggest and most complex challenges with innovative solutions. And I'm pleased to say Maurizio Cael, the founder and managing partner of the firm, joins me now from Johannesburg with more insight. Maurizio Cael, founder and managing partner at TLCom Capital, thank you so much for joining me on Channel's Business Global. Please provide me with some insight into the investment strategy of this Tide Africa 2 fund.
Yes, thank you for having me. The strategy is pretty straightforward. We back African entrepreneurs that use technology, that leverage technology to try and attack some significant Africa problems. So it's tech-enabled anything. It can be fintech, but it can be logistics, it can be agri, it can be education, health. So it's the entrepreneur that tell us where the opportunities are, but we need to see that technology plays an important role because it scales a lot faster and the economics are better. So that's the focus of our strategy.
Maurizio, is it just fintech? Because, of course, we know the fintech ecosystem has evolved rapidly over the years. I suppose if we were having this discussion 5 years ago, it would be quite new. Is that area still new, or are there other areas?
No, I think fintech is the easiest part because there's no goods to move, there's no products to manufacture. It's just easier to go around with bits and money. But fintech is really the general rehearsal of how digitization is affecting all parts of GDP. So there's life well beyond fintech. In fact, fintech remains an important piece, but I think it's less than 50% of what we see. And we see around 1,000 companies per year investing in 5 or 6. But there's agri, there's education, there's energy, there's logistics, there's commerce, there's all sorts of different parts. So fintech is a good example of what digitization can do and is obviously the first in the sequence, but there's a lot of life beyond fintech, definitely.
The spring meetings of the International Monetary Fund, they've just wrapped in Washington. Good growth projections, I would say, for the continent, although risk appetite, ebbs and flows. What is the sort of risk appetite you find amongst your clients?
So when we look at our investors, we are fortunate to have investors that recognize the upside of Africa, not just the risk associated to it. But it is true that still, in the mind of the vast majority of global capital, Africa carries a perceived risk that is higher than reality. When you think about in specific what we do, which is invest in early stage technology companies, the technology risk in African companies is very, very low. It's actually much lower than anywhere else. We're not talking about inventing new technologies. We're talking applying existing, very proven technology to innovative business models. So the risk is not at all in the technology side. And also on the Africa macro, these are initiatives that last 10 years, so go through cycles, and we shouldn't be looking at the quarterly numbers to decide whether or not Africa is risky. I think that what we're trying to do with the fact that we create availability of local capital, and our offices are in Lagos and Nairobi, so we're definitely local. And you see me, I'm Italian, but the rest of the 15 people in the team are African. We are trying to create the conditions to communicate very clearly to entrepreneurs that there is no need to go to the UK or to the US because there is enough capital on the ground and enough world-class business building capabilities to create the companies they want to create in Africa. And we are seeing actually a lot of very young, brilliant Africans that maybe study abroad, but when they think about what to do after that, now they know that there's an opportunity to build those companies in the continent. And so that's our little contribution.
Yeah, we talk a lot about the brain drain, but we don't talk enough about the great return of the diaspora. Really fascinating speaking with you, Maurizio Kyle, who is the founder and managing partner at TL.com Capital. They've got their Tide Africa 2 fund, which is going to provide an amazing opportunity for entrepreneurs on the continent. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Well, sadly, that's all we have time for today. But as always, do get in touch with your comments and suggestions. I'll see you at the same time next week for more in-depth business analysis on Channel's Business Global. Goodbye.